Welcome to the Traceless Podcast, a podcast dedicated to inspiring and teaching women how to discover Jesus in the fiery trials of life. I'm your host, Jess, and today's topic is all about addressing comparison and jealousy in your heart. Jealousy is such a tricky topic to talk about, especially like in Christian circles. It's not fun to admit when you are struggling with jealousy as a Christian. But let's just quickly define what jealousy even is. So I think some of the definitions that come up that really align with how I felt in the past is like jealousy is being envious of someone who has something that we do not have. I think it's important to note that as Christians, jealousy is a sin. It's not meant to be characteristic of our Christian walk. And it shows that we could be controlled by our own desires. And I think being jealous indicates that we are not satisfied with what God has given us in this current season of our lives. So before you check out of this podcast and start to say, okay, I don't struggle with jealousy, I'm going to turn this one off, I want to describe to you who I believe this message is for. I believe that this message is for anyone who feels like everyone else has been recognized, but you have not. Everyone else has blessings, but you don't. Everyone else is succeeding, but you feel like you're not. This message is for those that maybe look at the story of their life. They look at the pain, the loss, the heartbreak, and they think, this is so not fair. When they see someone else getting what they lost or what they're hoping for, what they're praying for, what they're believing for. This message is for the people that are saying, when is it going to be my turn? When will I get the congratulations? When am I going to get the platform? When will I get the baby, the fiance, the job, the car, the house? You name it. Let me tell you, this message is for me, and I believe that this message could be for you. So don't check out. You know, jealousy plagues us all at some point in our lives. I shared this story and I've shared this message somewhat in a preaching opportunity I got last summer at my church. But if you haven't heard this story, it's a funny one. But my very first memory that I have with jealousy when I was just 4 years old. I was living in Texas at the time. I remember very clearly this memory of me making a best friend with my next door neighbor. Her name was Megan. She was 4 years old, super cute little girl, glasses, wore a hearing aid, and we just befriended one another. And I remember she had a Barbie car, and every single day I would go outside and she would let me play in her Barbie car with her. Like, I'm talking about like those Barbie cars that are like all terrain that you can get inside and drive around in your backyard in, like legit a vehicle for a 4-year-old. And I remember one morning, really early before my parents woke up, I walked over to Megan's house, knocked on her door. Megan opened the door and I said, hey, can I play with your Barbie car? And I remember her saying no. And in a jealous rage, I pushed her, ran back to my house, pretended like nothing happened. And then the next thing I know, Megan's parents are knocking on my door asking, what did Jessica do? And I think about that story because jealousy isn't limited to just a childhood experience. It's something that plagues us at any age. But I think because jealousy feels so immature, it feels embarrassing. It's like an embarrassing emotion to admit. And so we want to equate it with only this childhood experience when it actually is a very real thing that all of us struggle with at some point in our lives. I used to think for the longest time that I just was immune from jealousy. Like, this is just not something I struggle with. That's not my struggle. But as we all know, we get into situations that pull it out of us. And another story that I remember is being around 21, actually like 22 years old. And I had moved away for the very first time on my own to live in Atlanta, Georgia, to do a year of school of ministry. And I remember I had been planning this move for over a year. I had, I'm a planner. I know what my next steps are going to be. I felt so convicted that God called me to do this, and I was just going to go by myself. And I remember just a few weeks before I ended up moving to Georgia, a really dear friend of mine, her name is Summer. She's a gorgeous, beautiful person. And she's super spontaneous. And she was like, hey, you know what? I'm going to tag along with you. I think that just sounds like an amazing experience. I'm going to do that too. And so I was so excited to have a buddy to come alongside of me in this journey. But at the same time, in the back of my mind, it was like, hey, she's tagging along on my dreams. She's coming along on something God has called me to do. And it's fun that she's going to come and be here with me. But this is my thing. And this is something that God has called me to. And so I remember the very first night of us getting to School of Ministry. We had our first night of service and an orientation, and people are ministering, and it's beautiful. And I remember this woman, one of our teachers there, just calling Summer out in front of everybody. There's 70 of us in the room, and she calls Summer out, and she's like, wow, you are just so set apart. You're so special. You're like a ray of sunshine. You stand out. There's something on your life. You're so unique. God has just a calling for your life. And I remember thinking, wow, this is so amazing. This is so cool. She gets this nice little prophetic word, and that's good for her. And I can't wait. I'm going to be next. God's going to speak something over me. Night 2 comes around. We're in service. God's moving. God's ministering. And it just so happens that the lady's husband that was ministering wasn't there the first night. He comes into town on the second night. He's ministering, he's preaching, and he looks and he scans the room and he calls on Summer. And I remember in that moment, everyone in the room kind of just gasped, because we all knew he didn't know that she was already prophesied over the night before. And he begins to prophesy over her. Wow, you're just so set apart. You just stand out. There's something unique on your life. You're like a ray of sunshine. You're just blah, 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 blah. And I remember in that moment going, are you kidding me? Okay, one prophetic word is great, but 2 prophetic words, that is not fair. And I remember, it sounds so silly saying it now, but I remember looking at that season and thinking, wow, she became so popular. It truly did set her on this beautiful path of growth in School of Ministry. She was so rooted in friendships in School of Ministry. She, just grew there, where I kind of ended up reclused. I remember just not wanting to hang out with people, not really feeling like I fit in, not really feeling like this was my season to be seen. And I remember that feeling of jealousy settling in. James chapter 3, 13 through 16 says, if you are wise and understand God's ways, prove it by living an honorable life, doing good works with the humility that comes from wisdom. But if you are bitterly jealous and there is selfish ambition in your heart, don't cover up the truth with boasting and lying. For jealousy and selfishness are not God's kind of wisdom. Such things are earthly, unspiritual, and demonic. For wherever there is jealousy and selfish ambition, there you will find disorder and evil of every kind. Sheesh. James is essentially saying that those who are jealous tend to cover things up. They lie, pretend like they might be in a better place than they really are. And that's exactly where I found myself in that season. And, jealousy is a more obvious emotion than we think. It comes out of our lives through bitterness, maybe towards those God has called us to love. I know in that season, I was taking it out in some ways on my friend. I think about the insecurity and comparison that I was feeling. God, am I not as called as her? I think about how it comes out in isolation. In that season, I went several months without developing friendships. I would say no to hanging out with people. I even at one point wanted to quit school of ministry altogether. And then it causes defensiveness in us. Jealous, me? No way, never, not me. In a lot of people's stories, I think in my own too, jealousy can often begin with disappointment. I was disappointed that season of school of ministry was not looking the way that I thought it was going to look. But in hindsight, when I look back, I'm already over 10 years since I was last in school of ministry. And God He used that season, in my life to set me apart, to put me in a season of stillness and quiet before the Lord. And He worked in my heart and prepared me for public ministry that I went into very shortly after. And I think if we are not careful to gain perspective about the season that we're in, we'll get disillusioned so quickly. I'm so grateful for the way the Lord led me in that season. My school of ministry director was so gracious towards me. She counseled me through that season and gave me perspective. She helped me to go outside of myself and reach out to people. And it really helped me get through that season. And I think that was the first time as a Christian that I really came face to face with my jealousy. It was always there, but it was something that God was exposing in my life back then in that season. But I think about a recent season of my life. As you guys know, my husband and I have been walking through infertility, and I'm actually so excited because our next podcast, I'm bringing on one of my dear friends. She's an infertility warrior. And I'll explain more about that later, but she resonates so much with my season that I'm currently in. And this is a season that has had a lot of disappointment. It's been 4 years since my husband and I have been trying to conceive. We've experienced disappointment in a lot of different ways. We've had, a miscarriage. We've had failed IUIs. We've had failed embryo transfers. And, something that I've learned in this season is that disappointment can lead to sadness, which then can lead to discontentment. And that discontentment opens the door for bitterness to take root in our hearts and resentment to grow towards others. I think that's super important for us to keep in mind when we're talking about jealousy today, that it oftentimes begins with disappointment. And I want to share a little vulnerable story today. I've shared this before, and I have the most amazing friendships in my life. I was just sharing the other day with my sister just how God has allowed my friendships to be like a river in the desert. These friendships and the support that my husband and I have received from our community has been so life-giving. But I remember a couple of years ago, sitting in a women's small group. We were about halfway through this season of waiting. I had just experienced a miscarriage a year beforehand, waiting to get pregnant. I hadn't seen a fertility doctor yet. And just a few weeks before this small group, I had found out that one of my very best friends was pregnant. And I remember thinking, man, this is how it should be. You try and you get pregnant. And I was so happy for her and also feeling sad for me. And I remember in the small group, we're all sitting around. A couple of my best friends are in the group. And someone says to all of us, So who's going to get pregnant next? Because she knew that there was about like 3 or 4 of us that hadn't had babies yet. Maybe we're wanting to have babies soon. But it was very obvious that I was in a season of trying to conceive. And in this moment of like, I don't know how else to say it, like jealous rage, very uncharacteristic to me, I blurted out and said, well, it better be me. I'm the only one trying. And I remember it got really awkward. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, like, why did I just say that? That was so obnoxious. That was so entitled. But in that moment, jealousy just spilled out of me. I felt like, duh, it's obvious. I'm the one trying. Like, I should get pregnant next. That's what makes sense. And what's ironic is later that night, my other really, really close best friend, who was also in the small group, asked to meet with me. And through sorry tears, she told me that she too was pregnant. And I remember in that moment, I was faced with a choice. Okay, Jess, do I allow jealousy to consume me? Or do I choose another way? I think in that moment, it became so clear to me that I needed to address the entitlement and the envy and the jealousy that I felt in that season, and that I was in a waiting season. And it was okay for other people to get what I was waiting for. It was okay to see friends in a season of celebration, in a season of redemption and winning. And I had to navigate this with the Lord. How do I get through this, God? How do I do this in a way that's honoring towards you, in a way that honors my heart, in a way that honors my friends and loved ones around me? And I think about what is the solution? How do I get through this? And I think that Paul in Philippians lays out a beautiful path that we can glean from today. It's found in Philippians chapter 4. And he gives us 3 important points of wisdom that I think we could apply to our issues with jealousy. Number 1, rejoice. In Philippians chapter 4, verse 4, Paul says, rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say rejoice. Joy in the Lord, that God, it really is in control of your life. I think when you begin to have that perspective to say, God, I'm going to start with thankfulness. God, I'm going to start with rejoicing in you, in the things that you have given me, in the things that you have done in my life. I think that start of rejoicing really can lead to peace about your situation. But then Paul goes on to say, whatever things are true, whatever things are noble, whatever things are just, whatever things are pure, whatever things are lovely, whatever things are of good report, if there is any virtue and if there is anything praiseworthy, meditate on these things. I think number 2, after rejoice, we have to meditate on the good in our lives. I love Psalm 23 because it says that God's goodness and mercy follow me. And I think that is a mandate to us as believers to meditate on the goodness and mercy of God in our lives in a season of waiting, in a season of feeling like we don't have exactly what we thought we would have in this season. What are the things in your life that are true? What are the things in your life that are noble, that are right, that are pure, that are so lovely, that are of good report? Because I can guarantee you, if you take some time to meditate on these things, you'll have a list so long, you won't even begin to be able to pray through all of them. God has so much goodness on your life, but it is our responsibility as Christians to steward that well and to meditate on them. This is what helps us to overcome our issues of jealousy. And then 11 through 13, Paul continues and he says, Hey, I'm not saying this because I am in need, for I have learned to be content, whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all things through him who gives me strength. Lastly, that last point, number 3, is that God wants us to learn contentment in whatever season we find ourselves in. We start with rejoicing. He calls us to meditate on the good. And then he calls us to learn and practice contentment with him. What if the life you have today is all you have? How can you steward contentment in what you currently have? The house that you are currently in, the situation and circumstances that you're currently in, the job that you are currently at. How can you learn contentment there? I love that Paul says, hey, I can do all of this through him who gives me strength. I think that's an important verse to remember, that it's not just this forcing your will to be content, because this is very difficult to do without the Lord. I honestly don't know how people without Jesus in their lives find contentment, because only true contentment can come when God has led you, when he shows you the things to be grateful for, when he shows you the things to meditate on in your life. And so today I want to leave you with this solution to battling the very real issues of jealousy that we deal with: to rejoice, to be joyful in the things God has given you, to meditate on the goodness that surrounds your life, and to learn contentment. And I'll leave you with Psalm 23, the Message version, 23, 1-4. God, my shepherd, I don't need a thing. You have bedded me down in lush meadows. You find me quiet pools to drink from. True to your word, you let me catch my breath and send me in the right direction, even when the way goes through Death Valley. I'm not afraid when you walk at my side. Your trusty shepherd's crook makes me feel secure. God, my shepherd, I don't need a thing. Today, I want to just invite you to meditate on that thought. You are walking this season out with God. You don't need anything more. I know your desire to move on to the next season. I relate to it so deeply. I find myself there often. I want the next thing. I want the new thing. I want to move forward. But here with God, you have all that you need. I pray that you would find his contentment for your life today. I pray that you would be able to meditate on the good things he has for you and find that peace that steadies your soul. It's peace that passes all understanding. It's when we give up our right to try to understand why things are the way that they are, and we just surrender to God's ways, to his will for our lives. And we settle in to the season we find ourselves in. Hey, I can't wait for next week. Next week, I'm inviting my dear friend, Teresa Palma, onto the podcast. Like I said, she's an infertility warrior. She's a wife. She's a mommy. She's a beautiful graphic designer, artist, business owner, blogger. She's just like a jack of all trades, and she's amazing. And I can't wait for you to hear what she has to say on next week's episode. But if today's podcast encouraged you, please make sure to tell someone about it. I encourage you to send the link to a friend, post it on your stories. It goes a long way when you share the reels that we do. And I would also love to hear from you. If you have your own traceless testimony of God leading you through difficulty, leading you through the fire, you can DM me on Instagram at Traceless by Jess. But just remember that whether you have been through the fire, are currently journeying through its flames, or you are about to head into the furnace, I believe that this Traceless podcast is for you. Until next time, love you.